The Legion Kratos heavy assault tank is the newest Space Marine armoured vehicle to be introduced to the game Age of Darkness Horus Heresy. This was a signature release as part of the 2022 Age of Darkness Heresy 2.0 game release. And as you can see, it's an absolutely amazing looking tank. It's a lovely kit, goes together ever so well, and it comes with a whole variety of weapon options. But that's not why I think it's necessarily a design masterpiece. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So firstly, let's understand where this tank fits in the history and background of the Horus Heresy. And to do that, we can look in Liber Astartes or Liber Hereticus's army entry for the Kratos. The Kratos is based on an ancient Terran pattern, originally used in large numbers during the unification of Old Earth. After the Emperor's treaty was signed with the Lords of Mars, the Kratos was redesigned to serve as a spearhead of the Great Crusade, a line breaker and foe hammer. Though slow, it is all but impervious to enemy weapons fire, and its steady, inexorable advance was the core of many Space Marine victories during the long years of Great Crusade. In latter years, the Kratos fell out of favour as the legions embraced a more mobile style of war, though the ancient war engine lost none of its legendary tenacity, having served with distinction in many of the Horus Heresy's key battles. And there you have it. This is the original Space Marine Legion tank, alongside arguably the Land Raider and the Rhino and possibly the Predator. But those were all other ancient designs that were repurposed into the Legions. The Kratos, though, that was something different. That was something created for the Unification Wars and then repurposed for the Great Crusade. And that is interesting because it puts it before all the other Space Marine tanks of the Legion era, which we see behind us. We have the Proteus, we have the Sabre, we have the Sicaran, we have the Arquitor, we have the Fellblade, and we have the Glaive. And this position in the lore is interesting because this design came after all these other models were produced and released. And what we're really going to look at today is how the designer or designers of the Kratos very cleverly combined many elements of the designs of these later vehicles into a single progenitor, and by doing so made something both new, exciting looking, and yet authentic and feeling like it has a correct place and sense of purpose within the backstory of the Horus Heresy. And we're going to do that by looking at these vehicles one at a time. And I'm going to draw your attention to the various design features that all these vehicles have that are combined in one place in the Kratos, which will then show how the Kratos is a design that in the universe influenced all these vehicles, or how these vehicles had features which were also combined with the ideas of the Kratos to create this range. And in that, I think this is a very clever vehicle, piece of design, and hope you're going to enjoy this journey. So let's begin. But before we talk about the design language of Kratos, we need to talk about where the Kratos came from. And for that, we need a Land Raider. We've got a Mark IIb Land Raider. The one reason I want to look at this is based on the original design. This is obviously the forgeable version, but the plastic kit is the same. And what this established is this style of these angular armoured plates overlapping on a Space Marine tank hull with 45-degree intersections and cutouts, 45 and 90-degree sections and cutouts, these sort of stacked vents, and the general sort of angular rounded off design. Also, another thing is these armoured hoops in the layers of the armour. That's an important bit of design language that this tank established and influenced all of these Space Marine tanks that we're going to look at. So before we start our main journey, we are acknowledging the importance of this Land Raider in establishing the design language of these Marine vehicles. So first thing with the Kratos is we'll just have a quick look around it. This is a very nice model. This is part of my Sons of Horus army. It's painted by a friend of mine, Hadley Carter. He's on Twitter. He's also on Instagram as a Dog Soldier Painting Company. Do check him out. I'll leave a link. And in general layout, well, the first thing that strikes us is it's a turreted tank with a number of crew positions in the hull, a commander's position in the turret, an off-center main gun, very distinctive design, a coaxially mounted autocannon, two interesting hull mini turrets, and I'll tell you where I think these came from, and it's not from within 40k range, which is interesting. And then a pair of sponsor mounted weapon systems, in this case we have Volkite culverins, and then we've got this hooped armour layout all the way around. At the rear, we've got these 4 large, impressive exhaust stacks with heat baffles on them. So that's a general layout of the tank. So the first thing we can say about the Kratos is it establishes this configuration of turret and sponson weapon systems. And we can most immediately see this if we take a look at the Fellblade. The Fellblade is an enormous super heavy tank of the Space Marine Legions, and it is a product of the Great Crusade. This very much came after this. But the first thing we see with Kratos is it has the same layout as a Fellblade, or perhaps we'd say the Fellblade has the same layout as a Kratos within the universe, insofar as we've got a large turret, this classic sort of domed panhandle. You can see how the Fellblade has got the same as a Kratos, a pair of sponsor-mounted weapon systems, and then crew positions in the hull. We see the similarity with the driver's slit. This crew position, however, came from somewhere else, and we'll talk about that later. If we look at the cannon, you can see a very distinct sort of rib style to it here, and this large muzzle brake. And this is a direct reproduction in the style of the Fellblade's accelerator cannon. So immediate similarities there in the style. Some slight artistic differences, but the battle cannon on the Kratos has been very clearly mirrored off that, the Fellblade. And of course, this is because the Fellblade is a development of the Kratos and universe. Another thing where we have similarities between the two, clever bit of design carryover, is in the armoured louvres protecting sponsons. You can see these here, these sections here. And then there's an inner sponson guard as well. But what we're really interested in is this piece here. And this is directly imitated in the Fellblade. So again, another piece of design that's been directly taken retroactively into the Kratos. The Kratos' command cupola. If we look at that, we see the same design on the Fellblade, as we will with all other Space Marine tanks. But another reason why we're looking at Fellblade here is this came before the Sicaran. Now, the Sicaran is going to have a lot of these features as well, but the Fellblade was the first of the new Space Marine tank designs in terms of when it was released chronologically. So it's an important initial comparison with the Kratos. We've got this recessed targeting diode, slightly different, but you know, it's the same basic concept. We have a turret bustle type arrangement, a turret stowage bin, I suppose. Here, it's highly integrated into the Kratos' turret. Indeed, it forms part of the weapon array structure. In the more derived Fellblade, this feels more like it's an equipment box that's been attached. You could almost imagine the Fellblade with this removed, but not so with the Kratos. But again, similar sort of design language. The Fellblade's power pack exhaust unit, we have the same 4 exhaust stacks as we do the Kratos. Different sizes, but same sort of general layout. And then if we look on the engine deck, we can see how they're very, very similar. We've got these vents, we've got these armoured overlinks, and we see the same on the Kratos. And from a side perspective, we can see the same sort of silhouette between the two tanks. So one thing design-wise that the Kratos is doing with this almost teardrop-shaped hull shape, which we see on both, and it's remarkable how similar they are. So the Kratos' general form factor is very similar to that of a Fellblade. Fellblade was made the first as a model. The Kratos is the first in universe. And we can see how actually, despite this inverted time relationship, we can easily visualize the Fellblade as being a derived design of the Kratos. Talking of the Fellblade, let's now take a look at its somewhat more arcane cousin, the Glaive. Now the Glaive, there's not a lot different to the Fellblade. The general layout's the same. But we do have the introduction of this crew compartment here. Both the Fellblade and the Glaive were designed by Stuart Williamson of Forge World, now Specialist Games Design Studio. And this is where, if I just remove the turret of the Kratos, we can see the similarities in terms of this whole crew position. very similar layout to this position on the Glaive. So again, a design similarity there that's being plucked here. Not entirely, because I think there's another place it came from, but in parts come from here, has been incorporated into the Kratos. And again, we've got two crew positions, another similarity, which the Kratos is mirroring the Glaive. Another thing which you may have spotted is the weapon configuration. And to properly appreciate this, we really need to go and activate maximum tunage with some Volkite. So we now have the Volkite Cardinal, which is a rather graceful name for a very destructive weapon system, but now we have the Volkite Cardinal mounted in the turret position, in the main turret gun position on the Kratos. We can see another bit of design language transfer between the two models. And here, with the monstrous Volkite carronade, we can see this barrel armor presumably protecting the hinge where the weapon elevates. And we have a very similar feature here on the Kratos, even down to the same number of cooling fins. So again, another piece of design language from a Legion tank that's been taken and blended very seamlessly into the Kratos. Thank you, Mr. Glaive. You can now return to the line. And in its place, we shall call forth the Sicaran. Here we have the Sicaran Space Marine battle tank. Story-wise, this is quite an interesting tank because this is in effect an evolution of the Kratos. And as you noticed in the bit of background that I read out at the start of the video, the Kratos became obsolete as the Great Crusade progressed and Space Marines moved to a more mobile form of warfare. And that is very much presented by the Sicaran. And Sicaran is the evolved Space Marine tank. Faster, not as heavily armoured, but much, much faster. So this has a move of 16. This only has a move of 10 in the game, so considerably quicker. And almost as heavily armed. An arm take on a variety of different threats. But yet, we still see the design linkages being preserved. So firstly, looking on the hull, we can see this sort of extended crew compartment here being very directly replicated here on the Sicaran. The lid of the crew position is identical, and we can see that there, and we can see that there. The frontage is slightly different, and in the case of a frontage, the armoured glasses section here, this is actually a derivation of our friend the Whirlwind Scorpius. And we can see how another bit of classic Space Marine kit design, so this traces all the way back to the original Rhinos, was evolved to become this. And that's the contribution of our little humble Scorpius to this story. So thank you, Scorpius. As well as this protruding crew position, which may be the driver, I presume it could be the driver, but we don't know. We also then have this front grille section here. I don't know, perhaps it's some heat sink, we don't know what it is. Maybe it's some sort of elaborate armour array. We don't know because the technology of these things is not explained for good reasons, because 40k is about fantastically far-fetched technology. The more you explain, the less convincing it becomes. So we don't know what it is, but it's there. And we can see how the Kratos features this very prominent style grille, or almost like vertical fin design, as does Sicaran. And again, Sicaran was made as a model first, but in universe, Kratos came first. So this bit of design here came from this. Talking of the hull, there's one very small little detail that I'd just like to draw your attention to. That it just shows how cleverly thought through the Kratos was in terms of pulling design features from everything else. And that's these two little armoured buttresses here, which sit beneath the heavy bolt gun in the hull position. And sure enough, we look at the hull of a Kratos and we see the same two armoured clasps located in the same position. Obviously different features around those. You've got the same feature on the same side of a tank. I mean, how subtle and also how clever is that? Absolutely love it. And then if we look at the power pack, again, we see the same sort of layout with the 4 exhaust system. Here, we've got different sized exhausts, which is suggesting a powerful engine, I think, and 2 larger ones. We also have the side sponsons. So a very similar layout in terms of weapon configuration. Obviously this has a hull heavy bolter and a different turret gun, as does this. But there are yet similarities with the turret weapons. So as well as a general panhandle design, we do have like a small turret basket here on the Sicaran. And this commander's cupola Again, very similar to that. So the Commander's cupola here was taken from the Fellblade, but again, it ties back in to the Kratos' design. And general form factor, we can see the lineage of these two vehicles very clearly. We've got the same teardrop design with both, where the Kratos had twin armoured hoops extending over the tracks. The Sicaran reduces this to one. We got the first look of the Kratos, which was in the Horus Heresy cinematic trailer. This vehicle was revealed for the first time, and straight away I knew that we had a new vehicle because I identified these two armoured hoops, which I knew was different to the one of the Sicaran. The general idea again of this layered armour with cutouts, which traces back to the original Land Raider, again, we see it in the Kratos from the Sicaran. The Sicaran design came first as a model, and the Kratos has taken that idea and incorporated it into design. And now in universe, again, is almost like the direct progenitor to the Sicaran. Very, very interesting design. Such a clever thing. And another little thing here, if we look at these mounting points for the wheel axles, identical design. The design has just been lifted. Every wheel has got a visible axle point where it isn't obscured by armor plate. We've got the cooling vents. Similar design again. You know, same place, same number of vents. Again, there's a throwback there to the original Ches Goodwin Land Raider, but it's nice to see how it's been built into this story. We can see this little panel is replicated here. You know, and there's an evolutionary design. These two plates are merged into one, changing the way the vehicle looks. So the Sicaran is an important part of the design makeup of the Kratos. So thank you, Sicaran. You can return. And now we shall look at the Arquitor. The Arquitor is perhaps an unlikely member of this story, insofar as it is less of a Space Marine tank. So far we've been looking at turreted vehicles. This is an artillery piece, or perhaps an assault vehicle or an assault gun. But yet there are still design cues that are in this that link into other Space Marine tanks and also are reflected in the Kratos that tell us it's from the same family of vehicles. The background to a lot of these vehicles talks about how the Legion tanks of a Great Crusade were developed from a variety of STC design elements, which nicely fits into how the models have worked. So as different as these are, let's pick out some of the similarities. Well, firstly, let's talk about the tracks. Now, this technically belongs to the Sicaran, but because the Arquitor doesn't have a bigger place to play in this, we'll let it have this one. And we can see how these tracks have got this distinctive design with these studs on, and we see the same in the Arquitor. Now the Arquitor replicates this from the Sicaran, but we can still see that the vehicles are from the same design origins. The crew capsule here is of a very similar design to the Sicaran, but it's mixed up because the Commander's cupola this time is not this style, as we saw on the Sicaran for that position, but it's actually the turret version which has been placed on here, which fits with the general concept of this being the command position on this vehicle. We also see evidence of the gills, or the fins, expressed somewhat differently in the Arquitor, but nonetheless, they are there. Again, it's hinting at a vehicle that's had elements of its design derived from the design of Kratos. Well, very different in terms of size. I mean, the Arquitor's got a little exhaust, which befits its generally slow speed. We can see they're designed with the same thinking in mind, the same sort of design language. And we have a cooling grill there, which again is mirroring the Kratos' design. And of course, the general, again, layered armor plating arrangement. And in a particularly pleasing little aside, we've got the same 3 cooling grills here as we see here. And that fits with the general back to front nature layout of the Arquitor. So that's a front, that's a front. But we see that the 3 cooling grills here are also here. But they're there, and then they're there as well. It's not just saying that they made a tank back to front, but it does have the same teardrop shape as well. I think that's wonderful. I really do like that. So the Arquitor, again, the Kratos has got design features that talk to the Arquitor very, very strongly. So, thank you, Arquitor. Now let's invite our little friend, the Sabre. And here's the Sabre. So the Sabre is a little tank hunter assault gun. This one is painted in the colours of Legio 8, the Night Lords, and this was painted for me by Vidpui. And I really like how he did it in this strong metallic blue. with the dirty snow effects on it. So a very nice model. He's over on Instagram as well. So this is a very different vehicle, but yet we can still see how in universe it's drawing the same design features as from the Kratos. We have the fins, or the gills, at the front, which matches. We have the same design for the road wheel pins. We have our 3 vents again. A little bit of a hidden motif is the 3 vents. I really rather like that. We have the layered armor styling. We have armored hoops over the tracks. And here we have a single one at the front compared to Kratos's 2. So perhaps this vehicle shares more in common with the Sicaran in that regard. We've got the vehicle crew position. I mean, again, this is more in common with the Sicaran, but we can still see the little slit and this. The commander's cupola is a turret design type. The same style of exhausts, although in this instance, exhausts are huge, and that's because this is all engine really, the Sabre. It's gun and all engine, but it's the same style as the Kratos. A less strong link, but indeed the links are all still there in the design language. And again, it's that story that's been continued on in the design. So, thank you, Sabre. So there you have it, the Kratos, the assault tank. An overview of some of its design features and how I believe this is a very clever piece of retroactive origins design. So, earlier in the video, I said I was going to explain the origin of these little turrets, or perhaps we should refer to them as barbettes, that term being probably the most accurate descriptor for what these functionally look like. And a barbette, of course, is a pivoting gun mount with a limited range of motion, unlike a turret. And these are very reminiscent of pre-dreadnought battleships and other warships of that era. Yeah, those are very much like that. Now, while these are barbettes, I don't think the design inspiration comes from pre-dreadnought battleships. I think it's actually from a modern day armoured fighting vehicle. And this is now coming on screen. I have a picture of it. And this is the Uralvagonzavod BMPT, which is colloquially referred to as the Terminator, which is a very Warhammer 40,000 vehicle style name, if ever there was. And as we can see from the front of this vehicle, beneath its turret, which mounts a set of missiles and a pair of autocannons, so twin-link weapons in turrets are a thing in real-world designs. It's not just a 40k thing. We can also see that there are a pair of small barbette turrets, now highlighted. In the case of the BMPT, these mount automatic grenade launchers. In the case of the Kratos, it's a heavy weapon, medium heavy weapon. And I think the BMPT is where this design idea came from. So it's a very unusual one, and I've not seen anything like it. It may be that the designer came up with this layout themselves, in which case it's an example of convergent design evolution. So that's my thoughts on this part of the vehicle design and where that came from. This is the last tank that was made in our world in terms of its design. It precedes all the models we looked at. And while it has its own look in of itself, when you look a bit deeper, the design is very clever in how it pulls out all sorts of different bits from these other vehicles and makes it both in terms of specific details and general form factor, which makes it a very convincing progenitor. And you've probably never stopped and said, this doesn't look like it could be a tank that came before all these. And the reason that is because the design work has been executed so cleverly, so well, and also so subtly that you didn't even realise how well it was done. And that is why I think the Kratos Heavy Assault Tank is a masterpiece of design. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll speak to you again next time. Goodbye.